Hello and happy Halloween. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Avalon.
And welcome to our very special episode of Dark Tales. We usually just release one episode a week on Mondays, but since a lot of Halloween events have been canceled this year due to the pandemic, we just thought we'd release this bonus episode for those of you staying inside tonight, and hopefully you'll listen or watch this and feel like you're hanging out with friends.
Right, so grab a drink or some candy and let's get right into it.
Right. So tonight I'm bringing you all something from my culture. I am Filipino, although I did grow up in the US. And one of my aunts actually suggested this episode, so we're going to cover some Filipino mythical creatures. And when I looked into this, I realized it was very creepy, so it's very fitting for Halloween. For those of you that don't know, the Philippines is actually made up of over 7,000 islands, and there are about 187 different languages overall. So there are, of course, a lot of different creatures as well as different beliefs and stuff like that, and we can't possibly cover them all. So we'll just be talking about the more well-known ones, and I feel like the ones that are very popular in the Philippines. And many of these places that do report seeing these creatures are in usually pretty rural areas too, because there are a lot of provinces that are more rural, they're not in a big city or anything. And that's where I feel like most of these sightings or anything have been reported.
Right, and many of these stories originated from indigenous Philippine folk religions such as Antisem, Buffalism, and Dawa.
Daoism?
It's not Taoism. That's what I thought the first time I heard it. It's something different. But they were eventually combined with various other cultural beliefs, kind of like what you mentioned earlier. There's so many different regions and islands and languages and everything that it's just like expected that there's going to be a kind of a combination of different cultures and religions kind of coming together to like form these myths, I would say. So they're not all, it's not like a pristine line of like, this is exactly what it is. It's kind of just a combination of a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like this is because, again, there are so many different islands and different regions in the Philippines, but also because they have definitely been influenced by a lot of other different cultures and countries. Yeah. For instance, the Philippines has been occupied several different times by the US, the Spanish, and I think the Chinese or Japanese at one point. So there's definitely been a lot of mixing with cultural beliefs and stuff like that. And there's also a bunch of other Asian countries that surround it as well, which I feel like definitely contributes to that.
Yeah, there's just so much going into it. They also have some similarities to Indonesian and Malay myths, kind of like what you're saying with all the different regions around it. And they incorporated some aspects from Hindu, Muslim, Shinto, Buddhist, and Christian traditions as well. So again, there's just a lot of different aspects going into it. And another thing we wanted to mention is that many of these myths have been passed down through oral communication. And despite several attempts to record all the oral literature, many myths have not been properly documented. So it's basically hundreds of, or maybe more than hundreds of years long game of telephone. So of course, like what we know now and what's been documented now eventually is not the same thing as what it once was. It kind of changes through time. But yeah, we just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved from, what the beginning was, and it may also vary very greatly from the different regions.
Yeah, for sure.
And before we start, I just want to issue an apology if we mispronounce anything. I definitely have an American accent now, so some words are very hard to say. So again, really sorry about that. So one of the more widely believed creatures to exist in the Philippines is called an aswang. And like I said, there's a bunch of different regions in the Philippines, so the beliefs about what qualifies as an aswang tend to vary. So the aswang usually tends to fall within 5 archetypal categories, and this is the blood-sucking vampire, which I feel like is the more well-known version of this. There's also the viscera sucker, a werebeast type of creature, an evil witch, or a ghoul that eats corpses. So like I said, the different type of creature that this is does tend to vary depending on the region that you live in and the beliefs surrounding that region as well. So the aswang can be considered the Filipino version of a vampire. And in Filipino folklore, the blood-sucking creature disguises themselves as pretty women and they marry these young men. And so at night, they'll drink a little bit of his blood, and they'll do this over again, and over again. And eventually, their husbands will die of anemia. And naturally, this looks pretty, it's suspicious, but it's not like a sudden death. I feel like
it's not all at once.
Yeah, you can see that he's probably devolving in health, and that's probably why they do it over time, so it's not as obvious. And when this happens, she will then go on to marry another guy. So this is sort of like a Black Widow type of situation. She will marry some guy and she'll basically feed off him until he's dead, and then she'll move on to her next victim. And then the next category is the viscera sucker. And this creature is said to suck out the internal organs and phlegm of the sick.
God.
Yeah. Kind of a little gross, but
Yeah.
And by day, they are supposed to look like a pretty buxom woman with long hair and light skin, but at night, it basically splits in half and it will leave the rest of the body from the waist down. So it'll leave its like lower torso and legs, and its upper body, like its torso, its arms and head and everything, will fly away to feed. And this is actually pretty similar to another creature called a manananggal, which we'll get into later.
I was like, wait, that sounds exactly like that one, but I guess it does different things, like with the phlegm.
Yeah. So it is, but like I said, there are differences and similarities in each creature, so that's how it is. Okay, so the next one is the werebeast, and this one can either be a man or a woman, although it is said to be mostly men. And at night they transform into this vicious beast, usually a dog or a boar or even a cat. So usually just like a small animal. And I don't know, that I couldn't find too much about this, like what they did, what they fed on, but I'm assuming they probably fed on like some type of animal.
Yeah.
And naturally this, like if you live in a rural area, you naturally tend to have like a farm and animals and stuff like that. So this would definitely be an inconvenience for you. And the next version is the witch. And for these ones, they're usually female, but can also be a male as well. And these witches are thought to be very vindictive, and even if they don't mean to, they can actually make people fall ill by infecting the victims' bodies or even just by looking at them.
Oh, damn.
I know, yeah, they're very powerful. And that's something I thought too, like, is it, because they said even if they don't mean to, so is it on purpose? Like, do they mean to do it do they mean to hurt people, or is it just kind of by accident?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it seems like the Aswang, they have malintent, like they're trying to hurt people, but in this aspect, it seems like they're like, well, damn, I'm going to kill people anyway. That's so interesting.
I know, yeah. But I'm not sure about that, so who knows? And they're even said to be shy, and they actually tend to live on the outskirts of towns and villages in abandoned houses. This is kind of funny to me, because I was thinking, what if there's just this sweet old lady living on like this cottage on the edge of town, and everyone was like, oh no, she's definitely this creature. She's definitely an Aswang, and she's just over there trying to mind her own business.
That's so funny.
But it is said that you can identify them by looking into their eyes, because the reflection in their eyes is supposedly upside down, and their pupils are shaped like cats. So I guess when you look at them, you see yourself upside down.
That's so creepy. So you'd have to get up in their business to see it. But that would be so... Imagine looking in someone's eyes and seeing yourself upside down.
Yeah.
That's so creepy.
Yeah. And the last aspect of the Aswang is the ghoul version. And this creature is basically said to steal human corpses to eat. And because of this, they're often described as having long, curved nails and sharp, pointy teeth. And they are mostly invisible, but when they do show themselves, they appear like a normal human, and they do tend to live in human communities. And it's also said that they smell pretty bad. Again, probably because they eat corpses,
I wonder if you could smell them even if they're invisible. You know what I mean? So if there's just like a random bad smell, and it's like, oh, it's actually a ghoul that's coming to eat people.
Who knows? That's interesting. But they do tend to congregate in cemeteries, and they are digging up, the corpses.
Oh, I didn't realize that. You said that. I didn't even notice. They eat corpses. They don't eat like live people. They dig up dead people to eat.
No, and this particular version of the Aswang at least does not.
What struck me about this creature is how different the versions, like, because there's some that is just basically an animal, like a normal animal from what I could tell, probably like creepy or more intense, but like just an animal. And then there's one with the bottom cut off, or there's invisible versions, or a witch. Like it shows itself as like so many different things.
Yeah, this seems to me that this one kind of covers a wide range of creatures here, at least in the US, like the vampire, the witch.
Yeah, like our versions. Yeah, basically it's all of those.
Yeah, and it's interesting because those would normally here be considered different creatures, but over there it's kind of considered one single creature, and they tend to vary.
Show themselves differently.
Yeah.
Right, so next we're going to talk about the Manananggal, which we mentioned it earlier. It's kind of like there's like an Aswang version of it, I guess. Like there's a version of the Aswang that is essentially this creature, but this is also another creature, which is kind of confusing. But so yeah, it sometimes is confused with the wak-wak or the asswing, but like I said, it's its own thing. And the name actually translates to one who removes or takes off or separates. And for context, it's talking about taking off or separating limbs or body parts. Because as we mentioned with asswing, it separates itself like from the torso up. So it's a vampire-like mythical creature, and it's malevolent, so it's out to do harm, and it's man-eating and blood-sucking, and it's a monster or a witch. So there's actually a lot of similarities with Asswing. Like it can be kind of different things. And the Manananggal is described as scary, often hideous, and usually a female. And it's, like I said, it's able to sever its torso, and then on top of that, it sprouts huge bat-like wings to fly away in the night in search of its victims. And if you look up pictures, there's some really interesting artistic renditions of this.
Yeah, because obviously there's never been like an actual photo sighting of them, so it's purely up to people's imaginations. But it's true, it's what you're saying is so interesting, because a majority of the artist renderings do tend to look very scary. They're like a weird shaped creature, but some of them are actually very beautiful.
Yeah, some of them are the sexy version. Just like we have like sexy versions of zombies or like any horrible creature for Halloween. It's almost like that with some of the pictures. They were a really beautiful woman, but from the torso down, they're cut off and they're like flying away. It's really interesting. I would definitely look into it. I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah.
So the Manananggal is said to favor preying on sleeping pregnant women, and they use elongated proboscis-like tongues to suck out the hearts of fetuses or the blood of someone who's sleeping, which is super gross. I had to look up proboscis. It's kind of like...
we had no idea what that was.
Yeah, it's kind of like what a butterfly has, I guess. Like they just kind of go in like a needle and take out the heart of the fetus.
Is it kind of like... Because when you say butterfly, I still have a hard time picturing it. But is it kind of like an elongated mouth, right?
Yeah, the example that came up when I looked up proboscis was anteater. So it's not their tongue, but they have like a long mouth and then the tongue goes through it. Okay. So it's something like that. And some of the pictures I saw, they just had a long tongue. So I don't really know. I feel like, again, it could be seen as different things, but basically they have something that they will use to pierce into the pregnant woman, which is awful. And it also haunts newlyweds or couples in love. And one source I found said that the creature was once left at the altar, so grooms-to-be are one of its main targets, which I think is really interesting, which makes sense that it's usually presented as a female, and it targets grooms because it was left at the altar by a groom. So that's a really interesting aspect of it.
Yeah, that's kind of sad.
Yeah, it's sad. And so once it severs itself, like I said, it kind of just flies off into the night with the top half, but the bottom half is left just standing on its own. And it's more vulnerable of the two halves, the bottom half is. So sprinkling salt, smearing crushed garlic or ash on top of the standing torso will kill it. And then the upper torso will not be able to rejoin itself, and basically it'll perish by sunrise, as the legend goes. So again, kind of similar to a vampire with the garlic. You have to use garlic or other things to kill it, and then by sunrise, it won't be able to rejoin itself.
I wonder if when they fly away to feed, if they will try to hide their lower torso, because it seems to me that it's pretty vulnerable and that's an easy way to kill it. So I would assume that they'll try to hide it in some way. I don't think they'll just leave it out in the open.
Yeah, just randomly. I don't know, like, does it walk away on its own, or does it walk? Or it seems to be from the stories I could find, or the information I could find, it just kind of stays there in one place. So yeah, I wonder if they hide it, because that would definitely be an easy way to kill them.
Oh yeah. And can you imagine just walking down the street and then suddenly coming upon this like torso without
I would be like, oh, spooky season. What are the kids up to this year? You know what I mean? But imagine finding out that it's real.
Oh, yeah. One thing that I want to mention too that's so interesting that you mentioned about the Manananggal, who basically feeds on like pregnant women, is that I was talking to my parents about this episode, and they told me about the story about how when they first got married, my mom was pregnant and they were living in these apartments, and I guess they had this neighbor who was an old lady, and whenever they were around her, my mom's stomach would start hurting. So I guess my dad basically took garlic and put it like all over the house, which is a little weird, but I mean, my mom said it worked. Like her stomach stopped hurting.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, so I feel like this is just the concept of better safe than sorry.
Yeah, honestly, I would do the same thing because it's one of those things like you might as well hedge your bets. Like you're not losing anything. Like you might as well. What if it is a man and a go?
Yeah. I mean,
that's so creepy.
In the worst case, your house will smell like garlic for a little bit. In best case scenario, the creature does not feed on your baby. So
yeah,
I think that's fair.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So the last creature we're going to talk about is, again, definitely probably pronouncing this wrong, Daleketnans. And they're a race of elf-like creatures, and they, I guess, are native to, how do you say Visayans?
Visayans, I think. Or the closest one that I know is Visaya, so I'm basing it off that. So I'm going to say Visayans.
Yeah, it's so a region and like a specific region, which I thought was interesting. And they were believed to be handsome and beautiful creatures that looked like nobles and monarchs of pre-Hispanic Philippines. So they look like people. And they would hang out in delicate trees, which is why they're called Dalekitnan. The name literally means from the delicate or delicate tree, I think is how you say it. So they would just hang out in these trees, which is funny to imagine, just like people that live in trees, but they're dressed nice. Yeah, and they're like put together. I don't even know. And they have sexual dimorphism, which if you're like me, you have no idea what that means. When I said that, we were both like, what does that mean? I've never heard that word before, but I looked it up, and it's basically like with ducks, how the male and female look pretty much completely different, or like their colors are completely different. So this is how it is with these creatures. So the men have light colored skin and really dark hair, but the women have like bronze brown colored skin and brown hair. So they look different. And stories say that they have leaf-shaped pointy ears, and in modern times they're shown to be very tall and dressed in a fashionable manner. They're dressed like the nobles and monarchs of their time. And they live in haunted house-like mansions, and they try to fit in with mortal people, which we kind of discussed is funny because, like, why? Why would you want to?
Yeah, but also, I mean, it's funny because they seem like these creatures seem to be the ones that stand out the most, and yet they're the ones who are like, we'll just try to fit in.
Yeah, exactly. They're definitely special looking, but yeah, I guess I don't know if they want to fit in. Maybe it's because they want to fit in to get victims. You know what I mean? True. Because then that's the easiest way to get them. I don't know, but we found that they want to fit in with mortal people.
I don't know why, but this reminds me of like the Twilight vampires, where they're like super beautiful, and they're not pale, obviously, like the Twilight vampires are, but I feel like the way their clothes are and everything, and the way they live in mansions.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that I thought of that too when they said they live in like these haunted mansions and they just kind of hang out there alone, like
or like just the Addams family.
People. Yeah, exactly. It reminded me of just a group of people that kind of keep to themselves and just live in this big mansion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some believe that the only way to Daliket, which is where they're from, is by entering the Daliket trees, which I don't know how you enter inside? A tree. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe they hang out there and then there's some kind of portal in the trees.
That's what I'm really
assuming,
sure. Yeah. The way it sounds to me is that maybe there's like this magical portal through the trees, and that's the land that they are originally from.
Maybe it's like a 9 3/4 situation from Harry Potter, where it looks just like for this, like it looks just like a tree, but it's a portal to somewhere else.
Maybe, yeah.
And so I was reading about them, and I don't understand what's bad about them. They just sound like elves. But here's where it comes in. This is why they're like bad creatures, I guess. Or
here's the dark side of it.
Yes. So the Daleketnans sometimes have normal contact with humans, and the humans have no idea that they're mythical creatures. Like I said, they just look like people. Mm-hmm. But some believe that they use magical black rice to change their victims into Daleketnan. So I don't know if they just feed it to them or what, because that would make sense if they look like people and they kind of just invite them over and then they serve them this dish. And again, like vampires, it makes them into like their kind. You know, like vampires will bite someone and it makes them into a vampire. It's kind of the same situation, but they use this like magical black rice to do it.
Okay, so that's all it basically takes to change these people into one of them. I wonder if they bring them into their world and then do it, or if they just bring back the magical rice and then feed them in this world.
I can't tell from what I could find, but I feel like they just gave them, I feel like it's like vampires, where they just do it in the moment, like in this world, and then it kind of transfers them into Daleketnans. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But it's also believed that they are the mortal enemies of the good Encanto, which I guess is what I could understand of Encanto is just like mythical creatures, pretty much, or things like other than humans that are something mythical. So they're like the mortal enemies. They're like the bad side of it. And apparently they're from the royal blood of evil Encantos that served as their ruler.
Oh, wow.
So this one was really interesting. It definitely reminded me a lot of vampires.
I feel like they definitely have more of a backstory because it seems
Yeah.
to me that they're, like in this myth at least, they seem to come from another world.
Yeah, no, exactly. They're so delicate. Yeah, that's the thing I was confused about is like, so they live in delicate trees. I think that's how you say it. The trees, which I think is an actual type of tree. But then they have a world called delicate, which is like their other world that they come from. And then
That's
maybe
interesting.
through the trees they come here. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting that, like you said, this one's a little bit more involved. Like there's a whole other world.
And there's like
behind
good
it.
and evil. They're serving this ruler of
Yeah,
royal.
exactly.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I thought these were really, really cool.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, they definitely tend to vary from region to region because there are a bunch of different languages and stuff. And like we mentioned, they were passed down orally. So naturally, these stories will evolve through each generation you pass it down to. That's just the way it works. It's like a game of telephone. But what's interesting to me is that for the Aswang, at least, it seemed that a majority of their like variations are portrayed as beautiful men and women, at least during the day, and then at night they turn into this horrible creature. But for Mananangals, it kind of just seems like they seem that way all
they were
the time.
ugly. Yeah, that's
they're
what I
described
thought
as
was
ugly.
interesting because how can they like disguise themselves? Because usually I feel like the whole thing with like monsters or mythical creatures that are bad is that, like you said, they look good during the day, so nobody thinks anything of it. They look normal, but then it's during the night where they get up to their shenanigans and they look scary. You know, they change their appearance. But with Manananggal, it seems like they're just ugly all the time. So they probably just like hang out in caves or something so people don't see them because they wouldn't be able to get anybody if they show themselves that way. You know what I mean? Because if during the day at least people would just like run away from them.
Yeah. And like we mentioned before, I feel like that these sightings or these beliefs are more commonly held in rural areas. I feel like Manila is basically the capital of the Philippines, so I feel like it's definitely more urbanized and you wouldn't necessarily see reports of these creatures in the city. It would definitely be more towards the provinces and where they have farms and stuff like that. It's very isolated.
And there could be several reasons for that. Maybe people in the big city, maybe they don't, feel like it's as acceptable to talk about these things. But it definitely could be that people are easier targets when it's like when it's just like there's not a lot surrounding it, especially considering something we mentioned before, that the Philippines is a shitload of islands. Like it's literally like you could have an island. Like I imagine some islands have almost nothing on them because there's so many. And like that would make you very vulnerable to these creatures. Like that's so creepy.
Yeah, I know. Because normally I am pretty skeptical when it comes to stuff like that. But when it comes to things like these, I don't know. These people have reported seeing them, and they are part of their tradition. So I don't want to say like, oh, I'm skeptical of these. I think it's but I think it's very interesting to see how it reflects Filipino cultures and the country itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think that each culture you can look and like each like nation or region, you can kind of look at their myths and then see how that reflects as a culture. You know what I mean? Or like you could see kind of trace back and be like, oh, well, that makes sense how they arrived to this as like their boogeyman,
Right. Yeah, because I feel like I grew up very differently from my parents because I was raised here. So I feel like I definitely grew up less superstitious than they probably did. So it's very interesting, again, to see like all the beliefs that Filipino people hold. Because they do have a lot of superstitions, maybe like different practices that they will take to...
Yeah, like
to
using the
avoid these
garlic.
things.
Yeah, because Americans are very, I don't know if snobbish is the word about that. It's not snobbish. It's like they're just really quick to dismiss things like that and just
Very
be like,
much,
it's not, like supernatural things don't exist. Which is funny because America also is pretty Christian. Like at least it was founded that way, very Christian. And there's plenty of things like that in the Bible with angels and demons and things like that. So I think it's funny that they're like Christians or this religion or whatever it is, but we don't believe in any of that. It's like open your mind to it a little bit.
Yeah, but again, like I feel like this ties in part to the whole like region that you live in. America's definitely more urbanized, especially after the Industrial Revolution. We have a lot more technology. So I feel like we tend to brush things off like that more to the wayside. Whereas people like these, they don't have a lot of technology and stuff to distract them. So who's to say? Maybe they are just able to see things more that we aren't.
Yeah, there's less distraction. That's a really good point. And I mean, if you think about it, there could be things like this here because there are so many unidentified or unsolved cases of missing people.
Oh, yeah.
So many, to the point where, I mean, it's easy for us to be logical and be like, well, they were probably sold into sex trafficking, or they were probably kidnapped and raised as somebody's own, or they were killed and they never found their body.
Right, like we tend to look for the most logical explanation.
Yeah, exactly. Which, most of the time it is one of those things, unfortunately. But not that this is a silver lining. This isn't better. But it could also be something like this potentially.
Right.
And we're just not considering it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's so many things we don't know. So yeah. I am not going to say that it's impossible. I tend to try to keep an open mind about this. So yeah.
Yeah. I heard someone say once, the people who are like the most confident in the things they believe usually know the least.
Probably.
Because they're like, oh, there's no way this exists. But you don't know that. So when people say things like this, I feel like they're more open-minded people because they kind of understand that at the end of the day, I don't know the secrets of life. So this could be real. It could not be real. I don't know. So I try to keep an open mind. I think we both are like very skeptical, but we also like try to keep an open mind because
it's
you
possible.
don't know. Yeah, you never know.
But we hope you enjoyed listening, and we hope that you enjoyed listening about a little bit of Filipino culture. I know this is definitely creepy. Like I said, it's very fitting for Halloween. We'd love to see what you guys think. If any of you listeners are from the Philippines or you have a Filipino background like me, I'd love to hear your guys' take, and maybe ask your parents too, because there are some things that I learned that I didn't know before, which I thought was very interesting. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And this is the end of our Dark Tales of Halloween. We hope you guys enjoyed the entire series. Definitely go check out the other episodes as well. And we'll be back next Monday with our regular episodes. And if you would like to follow us, our Instagram is @darkmatterpod and our Twitter is @darkmatter_pod. And as always, the full list of sources will be on our website, darkmatterpod.com.
Right, and if you'd like to support us, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you listen. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, we'd really love if you left us a review. Also, be sure to subscribe and like our video on YouTube if you enjoyed watching. And if you enjoy our podcast, please don't forget to spread the word to your friends and family because it really helps us out. All right, thanks for listening, guys.
Bye. Happy Halloween.